Retro Future.
Good day, ladies and gentlemen. It is I, Dankert Lexicon, back with another episode on Dieselpunk. Now, originally this was going to be a conversation about combining steampunk with dieselpunk, or rather, should I say, the dieselpunk aesthetic in a steampunk setting. But as I was about to continue work on this script, I saw the trailer for Nobody Wants to Die, a Tech-Noir game similar to Blues and Bullets, but with time manipulation mechanics like in games such as Haze. But as I observed the Streamline and popular styled vehicles flying across the screen, I started to wonder, will the dieselpunk aesthetic become the new cyberpunk? I'll likely shelve this topic for a future video, but it's important to keep this in mind. I said this before and I'll say it again, narrative genres do not have a monopoly on aesthetics. We'll see steampunkish visuals in all genres. I'd say that most media that calls itself steampunk are in fact fantasies with a clockwork skin. I have said this many times before, but it bears repeating. The word steampunk can refer to one of three things: the community, the genre, and the aesthetic. Hence, steampunk in this video will usually refer to the genre, while dieselpunk will refer to an aesthetic. Although good visuals are calling card for any media, aesthetics are but a tool in the artist's toolbox. Therefore, well-assembled settings have various aesthetic influences, but for those visuals to matter, one needs to understand the context from which these art forms arose. People treat the punks as though they have already reached aesthetic perfection, and therefore cannot, or will not, be improved upon. For me, steampunk is a framework. If there is a point to steampunk as an art form, it's to create something timeless using retrofuturism, aka combining futuristic technologies with historical aesthetics. Victorian futurism, or romantic futurism as it was originally called, is but one of the many sources of inspiration. Let me put this way. If this circle is steampunk, there are the areas here that the whatever punks cover. The whole reason why I created the Association of Ishtar concept is to connect these data points in various stories, yes, even the goths in brown. That said, are you already following our Kickstarter NIGHTWATCH, our very own steampunk RPG, and we are very close to 60 followers in less than 3 weeks, so please keep that pace going by sharing it with your friends. Before I go on, in my previous video I went over the origins of the dieselpunk aesthetic, and I made several videos on architecture and art styles associated with these visuals, and I do not want to repeat myself, so please watch those videos first to get the most out of this essay. As for dieselpunk, it's an aesthetic as far as I can tell, whose origins I explained in this video. I could summarize it, but I will go over these same points again, so... The dieselpunk aesthetic appears to be a blend of 1920s to 1960s aesthetics with tropes from the 1970s and 2000s science fiction. The reason for this is that these are the main anchors of American pop culture. In the first period, we see the rise of Hollywood and its glamorous pop stars, not to mention the construction of its famous landmarks like the Chrysler Tower. The second period is the era of the Hollywood blockbusters, its most iconic sci-fi movies, Blade Runner, Terminator, Mad Max. But then 9/11 happened, Bush was president, and Hollywood developed its white savior complex, and the design by committee culture took over. But it was also the dawn of the Iron Age of independent creators, and also the period that anime started taking over the media landscape. I think that it is from this milieu of nostalgia and desire for new content that dieselpunk emerged as a concept. Despite the countless reboots, Hollywood rarely managed to capture the spirit that brought people to the movie theaters in the past. Especially this last decade, people are like, fuck it, we have cinema at home. The point that Dieselpunk, in my view, is a repackaging of that late 20th century magic in a kind of World War II/Prohibition era skin. It was also an era in which the average American knew who the bad guys were, unlike the post-9/11 era. I want to be careful when throwing words like nostalgia around. However, it's hard to ignore that the popular view of these eras are instilled with this good and wrong side of history, a light side and a dark side, so to speak. If steampunk is cyberpunk in the past, I think a good descriptor for dieselpunk could be condensed down to Star Wars in the past. And that brings us to the topic of world building. If we treat aesthetics as a tool, what do you use it for? There seem to be two settings for which dieselpunk works best. The first being alternative World War II, in which our heroes fight cyber Yazis. Most of these stories, however, are more like classic pulp stories from the 1940s and 50s. However, you could argue that these types of stories became steampunk in a way, in addition of post-World War conspiracy theories about superweapons, Nazi cults and underground bases. The latter Wolfenstein games reflect this very well. Lost civilizations with super technology, massive architecture, oppression, but also a heavy amount of pulp influences. Usually the superweapons are there to increase tension rather than being a part of the actual theme. Low concept, so to speak, even in Wolfenstein, is about TJ's confrontations with defeat, old age and, well, whatever this was supposed to be about. Why the Star Wars analogy works so well is that Dieselpunk seems best suited for low-concept writing, aka stories that follow the hero's journey. These settings revolve around the characters, with a clear distinction between good and evil. This is probably why World War II is perfect for world building, because in the popular view of history, you have the good guys and the bad guys, and they have a perfect aesthetic to go with it. Almost as if we're living in some form of simulation. The Allies, for example, have round helmets, which look rather friendly. I mean, look at these good boys. Don't you just want to pat them on the head? The Germans, on the end, have these sharp angles in their helmet that many overrated directors would copy for that reason. The uniforms also have these angular shapes, accentuating the body shape, while Allied uniforms are often rather baggy. Don't you just want to give him a hug? You see, sharp angles and pointy things make everything look hostile. That's why creators love putting spikes on things. You didn't actually think they were practical, did you? You see the same in DIY armor that often has sharp corners, because our monkey brain goes, those are dangerous. This is why we are naturally more drawn to curved designs, instead of whatever the hell this is supposed to be. Of course, the issue with this aesthetic is that, well, it's a bit one note. You've got circles fighting rectangles. Your visual storytelling possibilities get rather limited. Because, monkey brain, round good, rectangles bad. Also, you have to realize that this is by no means new. There are genres that have used these aesthetics for many decades now. For me, this is getting interesting. When browsing dieselpunk groups back in the day, they often posted Streamline or Art Deco era cars, and we see both aesthetics recur in a lot of dieselpunk stuff. But when looking at dieselpunk games, these are often placed in dystopian or even post-apocalyptic settings, and yet they still have the Streamline Art Deco stuff going on, even in a game like Insomnia, which takes place on a colony ship. And this made me wonder, why the association? The dystopian theme is understandable. We already discussed how sharp pointy things can make environments look very hostile. It's no coincidence that Sci-Fi Tropes often have 1940s uniforms. Yes, there is a cultural association, but also the monkey brain that, even if it knows nothing about World War II, would tell you that these are the good guys. They've got earth tones compared to the other guys who have these stark primary colors. Anyway, Art Deco is specifically designed to dominate the environment, skylines in particular, and again, it's has many angular shapes to create that imposing visual. As a bonus, Art Deco by design is intended to look futuristic. Therefore, Art Deco and Streamline have always been part of science fiction, until Hollywood decided that the future had to look like everything was inspired by the Nokia iPhone. That explains the futurism, but not the apocalyptic bit. But then I recalled a little video game you may have heard of, Bioshock from 2007. Another futuristic Art Deco city in ruin. But now it makes sense, as the underwater city of Rapture was built in the late 40s. However, not all places look like this. The city also has its slums, like Apollo Square, a slum for the otherwise utopian city. When looking at the trailer of Nobody Wants to Die, we see very similar visual themes as Bioshock. Now, the easy response to this is that everyone wants to be the next Bioshock. And there are definitely such games that have tried to rip off Bioshock so much it's distracting. Too Close to the Sun springs to mind. Like seriously, if your game reminds the player of a better game, you failed as a designer. Anyway, when I look at Nobody Wants to Die, I don't see that. I see influence of noir and other known tropes of science fiction. Not just the time reset mechanic, but also the hints at something there might be cosmic horror related going on. This is probably the aesthetic that most Tech-Noir wants to imitate. Blade Runner and The Fifth Element. That and, of course, Star Wars. Despite the many mistakes of The Fifth Element, and being French, it's an entertaining and visually stunning film, but it's also very bright. Now, there are bright games like Crimson Skies in a also post-apocalyptic setting where global collapse has technology reverted back to a pre-digital age. It makes sense that when the global economy falters, we will return to analog technology in propeller planes. It would be technology a village blacksmith could actually repair, a design philosophy very prevalent in the early days of the automobile. Many people love Crimson Skies and The Fifth Element, but few imitate its sunny apocalyptic vibe, and this also plays into the universal fantasy that I discussed in previous videos. For those new, the universal fantasy is the basic premise of the book as described on the back of the cover. Crimson Skies plays into the pulp tropes of daring fighter pilots taking on air pirates and authoritarian zeppelins, but in Blade Runner we follow the life of a grizzled detective in a cyberpunk dystopia hunting down rogue androids, and among the way he learns the meaning of being human. But the latter theme is not the part that most people recall of that film. Readers, players, and what have you imagine being a Blade Runner. Blade Runner is a very dark film. The actual reason is, like the original film noir, the sets didn't look very good, so they used shadow, fog and rain to make everything look natural. However, they did this so well, it became the standard for cyberpunk. You see, film noir is not about adding shadow. It's about filming and lighting everything as if it is a horror film. That's why even modern noir doesn't use wide aspect ratios and prefer Dutch angles. It's not about adding shadow, it's about adding light. In Metropolis, Fritz Lang used vignettes, not only to make viewers focus on the actors, but also to create a claustrophobic atmosphere, forcing the audience to focus on her terrified expression as darkness closes in on her. And that brings us to another element that Metropolis is well known for, Art Deco. The recurring theme of this aesthetic are, well, contrasts, good versus evil, and decay. It's dystopian because beneath the rubble we see glimpses of what once was. I'm reminded of visiting a castle and ruined temples and trying to imagine what these have once could have looked like. And that is what you get when you walk through the world, like that of Fallout, which also uses elements of Art Deco and Streamline. These were once the palaces and temples of the modern age. Not just that, Art Deco represents progress. To see it in ruin isn't just a statement about the past, but also a statement about where the society aspired to go. A world without gods or kings, only man. I hope that going on into such great detail on these techniques I have demonstrated why I didn't want to discuss Dieselpunk for the longest time. Because, as a concept, it didn't come up with any of these techniques. Everything is taken from well-established creative philosophies and fictional genres. It mostly just combines these aesthetic elements into a single whole or something, and even that is well, typical of all science fiction that did the same aesthetics all the way back to the 1920s. And that is kind of my problem. If you would ask me what would be the prime example of Dieselpunk media, I would tell you to check out the films and stories that inspired the concept to begin with. Go watch Metropolis, go watch Nosferatu, Blade Runner, The Big Combo. There are some games I would recommend like Bioshock, Fallout, and Insomnia the Ark, hell, even Atomic Heart. But would I call these Dieselpunk games? Well, no, not really. I think it's important to make a distinction between what is and what people happen to like. If somebody calls him or herself a Dieselpunk, I get the impression of what their preferences are in media, but little else. If a label depends on what people enjoy, well, we can debate about this topic until the cows come home. And this is why the discussion around Dieselpunk hasn't advanced since I started this channel, because the label of Dieselpunk revolves around what people consume and not create. If you enjoy such deep dives in retrofuturism and sci-fi world building and design, don't forget to like this video and subscribe. The word to our sponsors, our members on REAM, and those who are buying our books and comics about the Association of Ishtar. All our income is currently spent on illustrators who make the illustrations for our books and videos. So want to help us develop our take on Dieselpunk and Steampunk? Please consider supporting us on REAM today, or buy our books and other merch on Gumroad. This will also help us improve the art of our alternate history series and make the Association of Ishtar one of the most extensive steampunk settings yet.